My name is Brian Manning. I am the Communications Manager here at Circle Surrogacy. On today's webinar panel, we have 4 people. We've got Alicia Abdallah, who's a licensed clinical social worker here at Circle, Dean Hutchison, who's an attorney, and he's our Director of Legal Services, Gina Marie Mariano Maddow, who's an attorney and an experienced egg donor, and then Minette Bryant, who's an experienced surrogate. Today we're going to cover a number of topics. We'll start with a little brief history of Circle Surrogacy and some background about the agency. We'll cover the differences between gestational surrogacy and gestational surrogacy with egg donation, or what we call GSED. We'll go through the process. We'll talk about our different programs that we offer to intended parents. We'll cover the legal work necessary, and we'll cover costs and insurance, as well as financing options. We'll talk about our egg donation options. You'll hear from an experienced egg donor as well as an experienced surrogate. Just some housekeeping before we begin. You are in listen-only mode. That means you're on mute, but if you have any questions, you should see a questions panel to the right of your screen. Feel free to type those in as they come to you, and we'll either answer them during the webinar if we get to them, or at the end we'll have some time for questions. Unfortunately, we can't have everybody off mute because there's too many attendees, but go ahead and type those in, and we should be able to get to all of them. We're also going to be recording the webinar, and we'll be emailing it to you at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alicia Abdallah.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us tonight. Before I get started, I just wanted to give you some kind of background information about myself. So as Brian said, I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I began my role at Circle immediately following completion of my master's program for clinical social work. The majority of my training was done at a major teaching hospital in Boston. And then prior to my experience in social work, I've worked as a paralegal at a large international firm, working in international arbitration and dispute resolution. And then I've also worked as a paralegal for a number of years for a local estate planning and family law attorney. So here at Circle, my role as clinical social worker is primarily in the surrogate screening and matching department. So I screen potential carriers and evaluate their candidacy in becoming a gestational surrogate. And then once they're approved, I prepare them for a surrogacy journey and then match them with intended parents. And then the social workers here at Circle, we also provide clinical or emotional support to gestational carriers who are matched with intended parents. And this starts the first month of their match and then continues through 2 months postpartum. So even after the delivery, we're still checking in. And then lastly, I get to work with prospective intended parents in consultations, which we'll talk about today throughout this presentation. Hopefully I'll have the opportunity to speak with some of you on this webinar at a later date. So a little bit of information, kind of background information about Circle. We're one of the oldest and largest surrogacy agencies in the world. John Weltman is our president and founder. He's an attorney, and he's recognized worldwide as an expert in reproductive law, including surrogacy and gay parenting. John began surrogacy legal work in 1992 and went on to establish Circle in 1995. John is actually a father through surrogacy. He and his husband Cliff have 2 boys, actually in college now. So why Circle? Why Circle Surrogacy? So a little bit of information about our program. We have nearly 100% success rates, and this really comes from the advice and recommendations that we give to our intended parents throughout the course of a journey. And it also comes from working with reputable IVF clinics. Should you consult with us at a later time, we're able to recommend clinics that we work with very often that have this success. And that also corresponds to the unlimited IVF program. There are specific clinics that we recommend that are able to offer unlimited IVF packages for intended parents. Kind of separate from this presentation, for U.S.-based intended parents, we also have international expertise. We're able to work with intended parents from all over the world, including all different backgrounds. We work with intended parents HIV-positive intended parents through our SPAR program, which we're excited to be able to present and offer to that population. And this is through Bedford Labs, which is located here in Massachusetts. Dr. Ann Kiesling is the director of this program, and Circle has had a partnership with the SPAR program for many years. Circle has an emphasis on known egg donation, and this is something that Gina Marie will speak about a little bit later tonight. And there's kind of various reasons on why we encourage this, but mostly to continue that relationship with the donor. You know, questions will come up later on, perhaps for the child, you know, who may want to know their birth story or narrative, and being able to incorporate that donor into the story is useful. That being said, we focus on relationships. We are a relationship-based agency. We want you to have a relationship with your carrier. We do all that we can throughout the journey to encourage that and foster that relationship. And that also goes to support throughout the process. From the first day of your journey, you're connected to somebody here at Circle called a program coordinator, kind of like a case manager. And that person supports you throughout the entirety of your journey. They're your point person here. So we really make sure that you have that support throughout. And then from there, long-term planning, kind of seeing you through from the first day of your journey till the delivery of a healthy, happy baby. So 3 important components of a surrogacy journey that I usually talk about in consultation with prospective intended parents. The first would be communication. So we're asking that you're in touch with your surrogate at least once a week throughout the journey. You know, that really builds up a bond, and then trust with your surrogate, which is the second bullet point. We also need you to be in communication with us. There's a lot of moving pieces to a surrogacy journey, and we need to be able to be in touch with you throughout and to be able to answer questions and support you. The second component, trusting your surrogate, knowing that she's gone through a healthy, successful pregnancy of her own prior to becoming a surrogate, and trusting your agency, trusting the guidance that we provide. The last bullet point, letting go of control. You know, certainly there are aspects of this program that you can control in the sense that you select an agency, you select a surrogate, perhaps an egg donor as well, but kind of knowing that the process takes on a life of its own at a point and kind of moves forward, and that's what we're here for, to guide you through that process. So 2 programs involving gestational surrogacy, the first of which being gestational surrogacy alone, wherein the intended parents are providing all of the needed biology to create embryos, and then along with the assistance of a gestational surrogate, achieving a pregnancy. So within this program, we would be matching you with a gestational surrogate that meets your legal, psychological, and emotional needs. The second program would be gestational surrogacy with egg donation. This is a better option for some of our intended parents. Your initial step here would be selecting an egg donor from one of our networks of egg donor agencies or clinics. Circle Surrogacy alone has 300 donors on our database. And again, something that Gina Marie will talk to you about a little bit later, so you can start there. And then once you've matched with a donor, you would then move on to match with a gestational surrogate that again meets your legal, psychological, and emotional needs. So the surrogacy process in order, starting with a consultation. So this consultation is usually about 2.5 hours, where you would meet with a social worker and an attorney and kind of talk about the specifics of your situation, you know, based on where you live, the laws of your state, you know, what that allows in terms of surrogate matching, and again, something that Dean will cover in a bit more of a specific nature. Talking about any IVF history that you may have had, if you are or are not already connected with an IVF clinic. These are things that we'll talk about in your consultation. Once you've made the decision to sign on with Circle, we would welcome you and connect you with 2 different people here at Circle. Someone called the program coordinator that I had mentioned earlier, your point person throughout the course of your journey. And then somebody from the intended parent support team, which is a new program that we've recently started here for our intended parents, somewhat similar to the monthly clinical support that we provide to our surrogate. We're able to provide an added layer of support for our intended parents So this support team is actually made up of Circle staff with a social work or psychology background. And part of our welcoming process involves intended parents meeting with a member of this team where you discuss support systems, coping skills, and other topics that focus on communication and pace of the process. While your primary point of contact through the journey will be your program coordinator or your PC, the IT support team person will remain available to you should you feel the need for additional support or guidance. So that's an added layer that we are able to provide. So you'd have conversations with these two individuals early on, and you'd also have a conversation about your estimated match date of when you'd be presented with a carrier. You'd also discuss your intended parent profile with your program coordinator, something that you'll become familiar with if you do move forward to a consultation. This is around the time you want to start thinking about your IVF clinic. If you haven't done so already, some folks come to us already established with the clinic, many do not. I had mentioned earlier there are clinics that we highly recommend, and we're more than happy to talk to you about some of those options if that's something that you're looking for. Once your clinic is established, you then move on to egg donor selection if needed. Again, this is not an option for all intended parents, but if it is an option for you, this is when you would kind of start that selection process. Initially beginning with our egg donor pool, which is easily accessible on our website. And then once that selection has been made, you move on to surrogate matching. Again, that process takes place at an estimated date based on your legal needs, which would be talked about in consultation. And then the last aspect of a journey, once all those pieces are in place, is your journey coordination. And this takes place primarily with your program coordinator, your point person, and they manage the process for you and alongside you from start to finish. So a little bit of information about our surrogates and a bit about our screening process as well that I can describe. So we accept roughly 2 to 3% of women who apply to be surrogates. And I would say, you know, the women who apply with us, they want to help other people. They want to help intended parents achieve a family. You know, that's something that we talk to these surrogates about during the screening process is their motivation for surrogacy. Some of the important requirements that we have to look for with our surrogate applicants before moving forward with them, even to a social work screen, would be a healthy BMI. IVF clinics set forth guidelines that we have to follow as an agency when we look for surrogates, and one of those guidelines would be body mass index, healthy height and weight. She needs to be between the ages of 21 and 41 years of age. She must have given birth to a healthy child. She'll go through a psychological screening in addition to a social work screening that she'll have with either myself or one of my colleagues. She also goes through what's called the MMPI exam. It's a standard psychological exam required by all IVF clinics in the U.S. For surrogates and donors, so that's something she would do prior to being approved and matching with you. She also goes through medical approval. So one of the first steps in the screening process for a surrogate is allowing us to obtain medical records from her previous pregnancies and deliveries. Those medical records are then reviewed by your IVF doctor, and that person gets the final say on her medical pre-approval. So we do that again before we'd be presenting her to you. She must live in a surrogate-friendly state in the U.S., and again, that's something Dean can cover a little bit more when he hops on here next, but that's something that we do look for early on. We also require that she has the support of family and friends. We know that this process is, you know, a lot of responsibility to take on, and we want to ensure that she has the support system available to her to get through the process successfully. And then lastly, we require that she does not use illegal drugs, that she does not smoke cigarettes or abuse alcohol. And these are all things that we talk about with her during the social work screen. And now I'll hand it over to Dean to talk about the legal aspects of surrogacy.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks again for being here. I'll give a quick background on myself before I start my presentation, just so you know my kind of relationship with Circle over the years. I've been an attorney now for 11 years, and my first job out of law school, I was a law clerk for John Weltman for Circle Surrogacy, as well as his private legal practice here. Over the next 6.5 years, I was an attorney at the law firm John was a partner at, doing general legal things, but also assisting Circle in that period. And then I took a job in Circle's legal department about 4.5 years ago now, where I've been since. So pretty much my entire legal career, I've been either directly or indirectly associated with Circle and working in this area of law. So I'll start with Circle here, and Alicia just talked about kind of our social work teams and our surrogate screening teams and our program coordination, but we also have a fully staffed legal team here. There's 6 licensed attorneys on staff, all of which have combined well over 50 years of experience in this field. John, well over 20 years, as he had both his children through surrogacy. Myself and Scott Buckley, who's our COO, have been with Circle 11 years. Gina Marie, who you'll hear from next, is in our legal team, has been with Circle, I think it's 6 years now, assisting with the contract negotiations. We have a counsel who lives in New York who assists when insurance issues come up, and then we have another couple of attorneys in-house. So there's always someone here if a legal issue arises. We're very available. We have a 24/7 hotline if something happens after hours and you need to get in touch with us. And I can speak from experience that we get back in touch very quickly because we know it's an anxiety-driven time for our intended parents, and we want to make sure you feel comfortable and that someone is there to assist if something's going on. And I've even fielded calls from clients who are in the local Babies R Us, usually international clients who want to find out what the best stroller is from a U.S. perspective for their time here in the U.S. So we regularly give out our cell phones as well, so you'll always have someone to reach out to if an issue arises. When we're talking about the law in surrogacy, really the most important applicable law is the law where the carrier is set to deliver. That's going to be the law that determines parentage rights for the intended parent. So when we're looking at surrogates, it's not only where they live, but sometimes if they live on a border and there's a better hospital where they usually deliver across state lines, it's going to be the legal work of that state where they deliver. So really there's about 42 some odd states where surrogacy is regularly practiced. There's only 6 with prohibitions on surrogacy, those being Washington State, Washington, D.C., which currently has a law pending actually to legalize surrogacy. Nebraska has a prohibition. Michigan has a prohibition. New York has a prohibition as well. However, New York also has pending legislation that probably within a couple years surrogacy will pass. And New Jersey has bad case law on the books, which is why we would use a surrogate there. New Jersey also passed beneficial legislation about 2 years ago, but if you remember, it was a presidential election and the law was vetoed by the governor there, mainly for his own political aspirations. The parent's home law is applicable as well, mostly for same-sex couples, and that is, we always think it's better for same-sex couples, no matter how you get on the birth certificate in the carrier's home state, that if you have the ability to do a second parent adoption when you return home, that you do that. So sometimes that law is applicable for our same-sex couples from states like Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, California, where you can do that second parent adoption upon returning home. It's always better to do just because it's fully secure in all 50 states if you were to move, whereas some types of legal work may not be accepted in other states. Tonight, obviously, a very general talk on legal issues, but if you were to take the next step and do a full consultation, what we do is have an individual legal plan for all of our clients. So depending upon what your variables are and what your citizenships, if you have something other than U.S. as well as your U.S., depending on your same-sex or hetero, we're going to create a specific legal plan for you, and I go over it more in detail when we have our consultation as well as throughout your journey. So when we talk about our the whole legal aspects of surrogacy, we kind of circle here, we say we have 3 main goals from a legal perspective. When you sign on with us, we become your attorney of record from that day forward, so we're representing your interests throughout the process. And our first main goal is what we say is to secure the intended parent's parentage rights. It's obviously the most important goal in a surrogacy journey. That's done through properly matching you in a state where surrogacy is practiced and we've never had issues and the legal work is simple. It's also done through negotiating your contract with your donor and your carrier to fully protect you throughout the process and make sure those contracts abide fully by state law. And then it's managing your legal work at the end, whether we're actually doing it or we're managing a local attorney in a state where your carrier is, to make sure everything's done in a timely, efficient manner and all rights that are supposed to be terminated are terminated and your rights are fully presented and made whole. Our second major goal in this process, we say, is to make the pregnancy your pregnancy. And what we mean is, obviously, the carrier is carrying your child, or the surrogate's carrying your child, but we want to make sure you still have medical decision rights throughout the process, that you have rights to see medical records directly, to speak directly to a doctor if you wish. And usually there's a provision in the contract that gives you rights to get a second opinion if you have a question about what's going on in the pregnancy and you want another set of eyes to look at it. And really the only time the surrogate's rights are going to supersede yours in these cases is when her life is in jeopardy. She's going to have certain decision-making rights. And then the third and final kind of main goal is to limit your liabilities in the process. And that's not to make you think some lawsuit's headed your way. It's more that every carrier is just going to have certain, or surrogate's going to have certain requests in her contract for provisions. You know, if she needs a cesarean section or if her doctor puts her on bed rest. And we just want to negotiate those to numbers that are fairly consistent with what we've seen the last 18 years, so you're fully protected in the whole process. The three main legal stages in the process. The first is matching. And as Alicia went through, there's a very thorough screen of the carrier where, you know, everything from criminal background checks, bankruptcy checks, medical checks, psychological screens, social work screens. There's then somewhat of a personality match. We're trying to make sure there's a relationship between the parties, but then there's obviously a legal match. So we're going to make sure that the surrogate's home state legal framework works with whatever you need, whether you're a same-sex couple that both want to be on the birth certificate prior to the child's birth, or you're a hetero couple that wants a pre-birth order to make sure your rights are in tune prior to birth. We'll make sure we match you in a state specific to what your needs are. After you're matched with a carrier, the next stage is the contract stage, and that is we're going to be representing you with contracts with the carrier as well as the egg donor if you have one. We draft all the contracts here first, set up a time to go over them with you, and then review, make any changes you want, and then it goes to an attorney who represents, one attorney will represent the donor, one represents the surrogate. So we'll be looking out for your interest in that phase and representing you in that negotiation. The final legal stage of the process is the legal work at the end to secure your parental rights. Usually done one of three ways in the United States. There's states with pre-birth orders. As titled, it's a court order coming prior to birth, naming the intended parents as the parents of the child, telling the hospital to treat you as the parents, and telling the state to create a birth certificate with you on it. There's a handful of states that require post-birth orders, and for some same-sex couples, when both transfer embryos and you don't know who the biological father is, you might have to do a post-birth order. But again, they usually happen within days of the birth happening, and you're treated the same as the hospitals. If you had a pre-birth order, there's other guardianship and healthcare proxy documents in place. And then some states have immediate adoptions. They're really post-birth orders. They happen within weeks of, or 2 to 5 days of birth. It's just as an adoption. But the birth certificate you get looks no different than if you did a pre-birth order or post-birth order. But really the goal in the end is to secure both parental rights, either in the carrier state or back home in your home state. A lot of program options here at Circle, and they're all going to have different varying costs as well as legal work, et cetera. We have some clinics that offer unlimited IVF, which is for one cost. You're paying one set price, and that covers as many transfers as well as embryo creations as it takes to have a live child. And that coincides with Circle's unlimited matching program. So if you were to take the next step, I'll explain it more in detail. But at Circle, our fee is set no matter if it takes you 1 surrogate and 1 transfer or 3 surrogates and 10 transfers. You don't pay Circle any extra money. We want to make sure you have a child, so we're not going to charge you extra if for some reason your first surrogate doesn't get pregnant, you need to switch, or she has a medical issue and you need to change carriers or change surrogates. Same thing with donors. If you need to change a donor for some reason, you're not going to pay any extra fee to Circle. As Alicia said, we have just plain gestational surrogacy when you're using your own embryos. We have gestational surrogacy using your own donor if you find a donor on your own or a family member you want to use. And then we have straight egg donation programs as well as clinics that you have frozen egg banks you can purchase frozen eggs from. The cost of the program vary by program, and they're going to range roughly from $65,000 to $100,000, not including insurance, medical expenses, and IVF. So depending upon the program and depending on the insurance you need, it can usually your $150 would be the most expensive, or usually the range that you see a full gestational surrogacy with egg donation. But again, much better when we have a full consultation to go over the specific costs associated with your needs. And if you look at the bottom, there's a you can go to our website and click on the cost button to see what the different programs cost fully with there's estimates there for IVF insurance, etc. What's very new to Circle, just about a month in, is we've secured an independent company that will provide financing for our domestic clients. They're a individual loan company that has programs that anywhere up to $100,000 loans with repayment terms up to 84 months or 7 years, and interest rates as low as 6%. So it's a new program that's been added that can help couples that are like that loan in advance. You may have the money or may need a couple extra dollars to go through the process. But it's a lot of people. It's been in I think maybe 3 weeks now since we've had it added to our list of programs, and we've already had multiple people sign up for it, or at least start the application process. Again, something I can go in more detail during a consultation and put you in touch directly with the lending company to speak to them. The final is insurance. So when we talk about insurance and surrogacy, it's really two insurances involved: insurance for the baby or babies to be born, and insurance for the carrier and surrogate for her an egg donor for the pregnancy-related expenses. The children's insurance is pretty simple in the U.S. If you have your own private policy, you're just going to add the child to your policy through either your employer or directly through the insurance company. You usually have 30 to 60 days to do so, and it'll all relate back to date of birth, so you'll have full coverage for the child. Carrier is a little different. Usually one of 3 types of surrogates you would match with. Some have their own private health insurance already in play that has adequate coverage for all of her maternity and delivery-related expenses. We've seen less surrogates with that type of insurance just because the insurance companies have begun to specifically exclude surrogacy from coverage. In those cases, there's usually 2 options. There's a couple companies that offer what's called Lloyd's plans. They're Lloyd's of London-backed surrogacy maternity insurance plans. One company is Universal, another company is New Life. And then just recently with Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, we've been able to find products in all 50 states, off-exchange products, that carrier or surrogates can apply for that have no exclusion for surrogacy, and they're just a full insurance plan you can purchase. The only issue with those is there's a finite time where you can sign up for them. Usually next year, I believe it's November 15th to February 15th. If you don't get on, you don't sign up within that time period, you can't use one of those products. There's also a small complications insurance you purchase for both the carrier and the donor. That is roughly $300, and it just covers any complications that could occur from the medication and medical procedure to stimulate and retrieve the eggs as well as transfer the embryos. And then we require all of our intended parents to purchase a surrogacy-based life insurance for the surrogate. And what that does is that covers, if the carrier was to pass away as a result of the pregnancy, it would cover, she would pay out to her family for a beneficiary as well as a payout to the intended parents for their losses during the process. In 18 years, in 800 some odd births, it's never happened, but we want everyone to be protected just in case. So now I'm going to pass it over to Jean Marie, who, again, is an experienced donor as well as a lawyer in our legal department here, and she'll talk about our egg donation program as well as her experience as a donor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. My name is Gina Marie. I'm one of the attorneys here as well as a 4-time donor. I've been with Circle for 6 years now. The first 4 years I was a law clerk, and the last 2 I've been an attorney here. During my time at Circle, I completed 4 egg donations, and it was a really wonderful and special experience for me to get to do that for another couple. Okay, all of the donors on our database have to meet our requirements. Some of those requirements are between the ages of 20 and 29, a healthy BMI, no history of illegal drug use, cigarettes, or alcohol abuse, a minimum of a high school degree. There are over 300 donors listed on our website, and we also have partnership agreements with 2 other agencies which actually give you access to over 1,500 donors. In addition to the requirements you see listed for our donors, we also complete a psychological screening, which is the MMPI, and your IVF clinic will complete the medical screening. Okay, how do you search for your donor? So the screen before you is part of our website. What you'll do is you will plug in the hair color, eye color, height, weight, and any other specific considerations for a donor that you're looking for. You can save donors, favorite donors, view their profiles directly from our website, and if there's a donor that you're interested in moving forward with, just let us know and we can get you any additional information that you don't see listed on the website. Circle offers 3 different types of matches: known donation, semi-known donation, and anonymous donation. What are all 3 of those things? Known donation is where you actually get to know the donor. We will exchange full demographic information, your full names, contact information, and you can have contact directly with the donor. You can meet her in person, you can meet her by Skype, by phone, or by email. You, as the intended parents, are able to set the level of contact that you're comfortable with having with the donor. Our semi-known matches are where you have some identifying information of the donor, usually her first name and general area of residence, but full contact information and last names are not disclosed. With a semi-known donation, you still can have contact with the donor, but typically that contact is more anonymous. You could create an email address, intendedparent101@gmail.com, so you can have communications with the donor and get to know her, but you're not disclosing your actual confidential and private information. With anonymous donations, this is where you don't exchange any identifying information between the donor. No names, no location other than your general state or country of residence, and there's no contact between you now or in the future. Circle does promote known egg donation, and the reason we promote that is because we believe it's important for your child's healthy sense of identity to know where they came from. Your child will ultimately start asking questions about their birth story, where they came from, how they came into this world, and how you helped bring them here, and we strive to give you lots of ways to answer those questions. We think that the communication that you have with the donor is a way to answer your child's questions. So that way you can say, not only have I asked these questions of our donor, but I have really good answers. And you know what? If you want, you can even meet this person. We've met this person. We've had an opportunity to speak to them. We found through our research that children seem to receive this type of information better from their intended parents when they have access to the other half of their genetic information. For me, I did all different types of donations. I did 1 known, 1 semi-known, and 2 anonymous. If you want my personal opinion, it's known donation all the way. It's a really special and wonderful experience to get to have with the intended parents. It's really nice to get to talk to them and to really see what wonderful parents they're going to be and to help be their cheerleader as they're trying to become parents. I really enjoyed getting to know my intended parents. I found I had a lot in common with them. I could see very clearly why they chose me as their donor. With the anonymous matches, those are still very special and enriched my life in a wonderful way, but it's different. I don't know the gender of the children that are born. I don't know anything about the parents. I don't even have a picture of them. And I find a lot of joy in seeing the pictures of the children, seeing how happy they are with their parents. It's turned out to be a really beautiful experience for me. And now we're going to turn it over to Manette to talk about surrogacy.
I'm here. Sorry, I had to unmute the phone. Hello. I am actually not in the Circle office. because I live in Texas, but this is a modern world, and so I can do work for Circle without actually having to be in Boston, which is great because my dog would miss me terribly in Texas. I actually did a surrogacy. I carried twins 8 years ago. They're big people now. It's incredible to watch them grow. I was enjoying what she was just saying about the known egg donation because my experience in the relationship that I have with the family that I cared for and then the children, because my own son is 10 years old, and he and the little boy of the twins that I carried are just the best of friends. They love to play video games together, and they send letters to each other. And last summer, the twins came down and visited us for a week, and this summer, my kids are all going up there for a week. And I know that not every family maintains that level of contact. Again, just like she was saying with the egg donation, the intended parents and the surrogates during the matching process, they will all be able to talk about what kind of or what level of contact they want to maintain throughout. We just really hit it off and became like one big family, which was really great for my family. I am the oldest of 4 children, and so all of the time that I was growing up, I was watching my mother be pregnant and have babies and helping her take care of babies. And I remember I saw an episode of Oprah. I guess I was about 17, and my youngest brother had just been born, and my mother and I were sitting together in the living room watching this episode. And Oprah had on there a woman and her daughter, and the woman in her, I don't know, 40s, I guess, had carried a baby for her daughter, and so Oprah had them on to talk about that. It's the first time I had ever heard of such a thing. And I asked my mother, I said, would you do that for me? And she says, well, of course I would. You won't need it, but of course I would. And she was right, because for me, getting pregnant and having babies and healthy deliveries was always really easy. And so as I was filling my own nest, I have 3 children, I was always aware of the people who were going through a really hard time trying to get pregnant, either the old-fashioned way or through various forms of IVF. And of course, we're talking about in the early 90s when it was really just starting to be kind of the thing that people talked about, and it was very expensive and it was very complicated, and the success rate was not really all that great in the in its infancy. And after my son was born, and I knew I wasn't going to have any more babies, and I had my tubes tied, I had a friend who actually went through an adoption, and she was so happy, and she had the baby for like 7 days, and the teenage mother changed her mind and took the baby back. And it was tragic to watch her going through that, and that is really what kicked me. It sort of took that thing that was in the back of my head and pushed it to the front. This is why I want to be a surrogate, because I love being pregnant. I love the whole experience. I think everybody should be able to have that, and I can do that for someone else. And now doing the work that I do for Circle, I kind of get to be first contact for a lot of the potential surrogates who come to the website and just have questions, just really generic questions. I'm just interested in knowing more. And the thing that so many of them tell me, I mean, it's just like listening to myself. I love being pregnant, but I don't want more children of my own. I just really want to help someone else because I know how happy my children make me. And that's just the general community for why people want to become a surrogate. And I love having those conversations with people because it's still very exciting to me. When I made the decision that I was going to do that I just was determined to be a surrogate, it actually took me a little while to get my courage up to say anything to anyone. And the first thing that I did was I told my daughter, who was 11 at the time, I just said, I'm really thinking about doing this. And she had just a casual attitude, because you know how kids are. Oh, okay, well, Mom said this. So she says, oh, well, how do you do that? And I said, I don't even know. So we went together and started looking at it online, but talking to her about it gave me the courage then to talk to my mother, and she was a little bit skeptical, because she'd never known anybody who did that. But ultimately, my family was very supportive, and just like you heard earlier, that the family support is incredibly important. I went through a phase, I call it my before Circle phase, because I was just sort of scouting on the internet, and I got involved with a series of agencies, all of which I found very disappointing. At one point I realized, I think this woman has just got a desk in her basement or something. But it was a discouraging period, and I looked at all the ads for people who were just privately looking for a surrogate, and that seemed really scary. And I remember I stayed up all night one night on Valentine's Day, and I stumbled across Circle Surrogacy. I think Circle had just put their ad on Google. That's what somebody told me later, that Circle had just come on Google. And it was the middle of the night, and I had to wait until the morning. That was horrible. I hated waiting. I felt like I'd already been waiting for so long. And finally, at like 8 o'clock in the morning for me, which would have been 9 o'clock for them, someone called me based on an answer I had put on an ad on Google. And I just, from the minute that we first started talking, it just, it's like we hit the ground running. I had already done so much of my homework through the other agencies that I was able to get through the screening process pretty quickly, because I was already ready with an answer on a lot of things about insurance and a lot of the questions that I knew they were going to ask me. And so they actually, because I'm in Texas, and Texas is still really closed-minded about same-sex couples having both names on the birth certificate, they actually matched me with a single man. He had registered with them as a single man. And when they set us up for our matching phone call, I think they do it on Skype now, but this was in the olden days, 9 years ago. And when they matched us for the phone call, and he was actually in Afghanistan, so he had to call me on my timetable. And we talked for like an hour and a half, which was funny because when we both called in and reported that it went great, we were both told, people talk, maybe 5 or 10 minutes the first time, but we had just really hit it off, and we knew this was right. And so then I started the medical process, and the medical process involves a lot of, drugs. It's not fun, but it's important because the body has to be tricked into thinking it got pregnant the old-fashioned way so that it doesn't reject the embryo. So that was all of this. Throughout the medical process, I was also going through the legal process. I actually had to sign and have notarized a celibacy contract. That was like so funny. I feel confident that the lady at the bank who notarized that probably went home that night and said, "You're not going to believe what I saw today." A notarized celibacy contract. But anyway, all of this was sort of happening in the background like a symphony, all the legal work and all the medical stuff, and they just told me what to do. And the intended father and I talked on the phone about once a week, and the social worker kept in touch with me, I guess about once a month, and we would always have like an hour session to talk about it, and I loved that too, because so many of the people in my life kind of didn't want to hear me just talk about it all the time, and so the support that I had to be able to talk openly about all the different aspects of it was great, because that just knowing I had that support was fabulous. And so then also while I was going through all of the drugs, the hormones to get myself ready, somewhere in New Hampshire, the egg donor was getting herself ready. And so they were coordinating that, and they sort of put me in a holding pattern until she was ready. And then I literally had to just be ready at the drop of a hat when they called me and said it's time to get on a plane and fly to New England for the IVF transfer, and then sort of lie quietly for a couple of days. And the day after the transfer, I stood up out of bed to go to breakfast. And when I stood up, I had a wave of nausea, and I said, "Oh, that's probably a good sign." And that was actually the only nausea I had the whole pregnancy. And so I took a pregnancy test about a week later, and it had sort of a weak line. And then I had the official test, and Circle called me and told me that my numbers were so high it was probably twins. And the agency was extremely supportive throughout the whole pregnancy. Because it was twins, I needed maternity clothes sooner than we had expected, and I mean, it was all right there. Anything that I needed, it was extremely positive experience. And then when it was time for the twins to be born, which they came early because twins are funny about that. Your body just says, "Wow, that's a big baby." I actually wound up having to have the babies in a hospital that wasn't my hospital, because they wanted me to be somewhere where it was a really great NICU. And so I know that the hospital staff was kind of watching me closely, and the dad was there from the minute he knew I was in labor. He got on a plane, and he was there by the time I was actually being prepped for the C-section. And but the hospital staff, they had not had a surrogacy before, and they didn't know. I mean, they didn't know me. They didn't know my story. So this was very much a novelty, and there was a lot of whispering, and there were a lot of people coming in and asking me the same questions about, was I going to have a hard time giving the babies away? And I said, you know, the thing is, it's kind of like when you have the perfect Christmas present for someone, you know, and you had it since July, and you've got it in the back of your closet, and sometimes you can't wait to, you know, you open the closet just to look at it and think about what the look on their face is going to be like when they open it. But at no time do you just want to keep it for yourself. That wasn't the point. The whole point was to do this for somebody else. And so when the babies were born, I was so proud of them. But I didn't, you know, I didn't need to keep them. I had my own babies. But I was so happy to see, you know, to watch them wrap their little fingers around their daddy's hand and just him just go on and on about how they were progressing. And also right there in the hospital, the lawyers came in and did the legal paperwork so that I was signing, my husband and I both had to sign, like we're signing away our rights, but there had been the pre-birth order, so obviously we didn't have rights anyway. These were not our babies in any way. And that felt very final. I know that was the one time I sort of battled tears, not because I was sad about the babies, but I was just sad because the experience was kind of over with that signature, except it wasn't over. Because there's so much that I still, I mean, even just getting to tell this story now, you know, is still an impact on me and hopefully on other people. And I think I look back on that experience and kind of say, if I could do that, I can do anything, you know, and that's been motivating in my life. Plus just watching the children grow and seeing what they can accomplish and how that impacts my family and all of that. So I think that's my story. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Manette, for sharing your experience.
Hi, it's Dean again. So I just wanted to say we're going to answer some of the questions that are out, and please start typing in more questions if you have them. But before we go to the questions, if after tonight, you know, you want to learn some more information, you go to our website and review some of the different things we talked about. But if you also want to have a consultation, which is a more, as Alicia said, private affair with two of us, where we go specifics over what your needs will be and what the cost will be associated with your plan, feel free to reach out to us. Again, they're free. They last about 2.5 hours. We can do them via Skype, via phone if need be, or in person. We travel around the country a couple of times a year, as well as people come directly to us in Boston to see us in our offices. There's two halves to it. You'll meet with a social worker first, kind of go through the process in more detail and a lot about yourself, as well as then a more in-depth part on the legal part. And then you can, you know, both of us will have the ability to answer and ask and answer questions to each other. If you want to reach out for that, the next, our website is up top, and if you want to get a consultation, you can reach out to Bruce Hale. Bruce is a two-time parent to Circle. He's also in our legal team here, but does more of a parent outreach. And he can help schedule a further consultation. So again, I'm going to start answering questions, but if you have any more, please type them in and we'll go through them. So the first question was about, can you, I'm guessing, can us as attorneys handle second parent adoptions in Florida? We can't do it, but we have attorneys we work with all the time in Florida that can do them there. So we would just assist you in putting you in touch with them. We're licensed to practice law in 3 states, the attorneys here: Massachusetts, California, and New York. Obviously, if you had a carrier in surrogate in Massachusetts or California, we would assist. New York, since surrogacy is illegal there at the moment, we wouldn't ever match you there, but in a couple of years when it becomes legal, we will. The next question is, so am I to understand that we can have the option of the surrogate mother having a role in the baby's life? We would really like that. Yes, I mean, we would know that in advance of matching, in the sense of what type of relationship you want, and by being in the baby's life, it'd be more of contact, you know, if you want to introduce them afterwards. Alicia can speak more from a social work perspective, but I think a lot of our families have long-lasting relationships with their surrogates as well as donors after birth. But Alicia can kind of step in on that from a social work perspective.
Hi there. Yeah, I would say that that's very likely to happen. We see that happen in most cases, to be honest. And I have to say, I think that's why a lot of women apply to Circle specifically. They have lots of options out there, lots of different agencies and options to go with, and I think that they look for Circle based on the relationship. That we emphasize that with our intended parents and expect that of our intended parents, and do the same for our surrogates. So I think, you know, being in communication throughout the course of the journey in pregnancy is key, and then, you know, maintaining that level of contact post-birth. You know, it's up to the intended parents how they want to go about doing that and the level of contact they want to have, but, you know, we certainly see that happen. And as Manette had just discussed, you know, she continues to be in touch with her intended father, you know, eight years later. Manette, I don't know if you want to chime in a little bit about, you know, your own experience and the extent to which, you know, you guys are still in touch and maintain a relationship.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, these days, because of Facebook and whatever, it's so easy to stay in touch and to see pictures. And then there actually, last spring, I got a text message from the father who said that the little boy had asked, "Who's my mommy?" Like, it just occurred to him, "Who's my mommy?" And he said, it's time for them to meet you. I mean, they had seen me when they were like 2. To just reveal any veil of uncertainty, because, I mean, obviously we've learned that it's just better to be honest with children, and these days there are so many different ways that children become part of their family, and just telling them right from the beginning is important. And so being able to build that relationship. And then when I met Vincent, he was so funny with his little question. "So I grew in your tummy?" "Yes, you did, right here in my tummy." "Would you like to see the scar?" "No, I didn't say that."
So the next question is, can I have the embryos frozen first and later look for a surrogate mother? Yep, that's an option. You'd want to speak with your IVF, whichever clinic you choose first. Really the statistical success on frozen versus fresh embryo transfers is nearly identical now in most clinics, but some doctors do favor transferring fresh embryos versus frozen. But we have a lot of clients who come to us, who already either done IVF on their own and have embryos available, or have worked with a clinic and an egg donor and created their embryos well in advance of starting the process. So yeah, you can do it at any different stages. As Alicia said, we usually like the process to go pick your clinic, pick your donor, pick your carrier anyway. So depending on the clinic you're working with, a lot of clinics now do prefer frozen embryo transfers versus fresh.
Okay, those are all the questions we are seeing right now. We'll hang on the line for a little bit longer. Again, if you do have a question, there is a pane in your in the window to the right there that says questions. You can just type that in and hit submit, and it should show up, and we'll be able to read them out loud. Then remember, we have an experienced egg donor here, an experienced surrogate, an attorney, and a social worker. So we'll just hang on the line for a little bit longer, and feel free to type those questions in, and if not, we'll say goodbye in a few minutes.
So the first question is about, specifically, we worked with Texas clinics before, and I believe we have. If you do go to the next consultation stage, there is a provision that says if we haven't worked with your IVF clinic in the past, we do reserve the right to do some type of, not investigation, but vet them out a little just to make sure they're, what their experience is, what their success rates are like, and what their facilities are like, just because we're obviously sending potentially a donor and a surrogate there, so we want to make sure they're top of the line. But yes, we've worked with clinics all over the country. We have couples that come to us with already working with clinics, et cetera, so we definitely can work with other ones.
So the next question that just came up, ever had the surrogate mother end up living with the intended parents? I have never come across that experience in my time here. The surrogate lives in her home community for the duration of the pregnancy. Part of the relationship piece that we encourage is that you're in communication with her, and in addition, you visit her. You meet her family, her support system. You see her home community. Perhaps you can attend a medical appointment. I know the 20-week ultrasound during the pregnancy is an exciting time to go out and visit the surrogate. Perhaps take a tour of the hospital where she plans to deliver, and then you would head back home for the duration of the pregnancy and get back on a plane or get back in the car, 20 weeks or so later for the delivery, but you both remain in your home community for the duration of the pregnancy.
So the question whether there's an age limit for potential fathers or single, I'm going to get single intended parents. I believe we have a combined age limit. I believe the single age limit is 55. However, it's a case-by-case basis. So, we have had people older or people younger that weren't allowed to join because of maybe illness history, things like that. But definitely, you can reach out to us directly. You can reach out to Bruce on the screen to give specifics, and we can answer it directly after that. All right, so there's a question, how long should we plan for all the processes required before the actual transfer of embryo to surrogate? So it somewhat depends, but in our domestic program, we say about 2 to 4 months from signing on with Circle with your surrogate. You'd expect another probably 60 to 90 days prior to a match there. But depending upon your demographics and your situation, I can say like heterosexual couples who are using their own embryos are the easiest couples to match because there's just more states and more laws that are conducive to that type of relationship. So we've had couples sign on and match within a month with a carrier or surrogate, and if they already have embryos frozen, could be transferring embryos within 90 days of signing on. But all in all, you're looking at like a 12 to 18 month journey, start to finish, from signing on to having the child. So usually for domestic clients, within that first 6 months, you're transferring the first transfer. So there's a question, do contracts specify for multiple gestation options? What if triplets is usually specified in advance? So the contracts are usually talk about how many embryos you're allowed to transfer, because some surrogates may only be allowed to transfer single embryos based upon their medical records. And there's also usually provisions in the contract that if a surrogate gets pregnant with multiple, she gets added compensation because of the stress of the pregnancy, et cetera. And then there's usually provisions about what's called selective reduction. So if a surrogate was to get pregnant with triplets or quadruplets and they want to reduce to the intended parents or the carrier needs to reduce for reasons, that option is available. So the contract will be specific as to what would happen in those cases and what the options are if it does that. All right, it looks like that's the last of the questions. If you have a question pops up in the next hour or next couple days, feel free to reach out to Bruce's direct email on this line, and you can direct it to myself, Brian, Gina Marie, Alicia, or Annette if you have specific questions to each of us. But otherwise, also reach out to Bruce if you want to go forward with the next step of a full consultation. Thank you all for spending the time with us tonight. We really appreciate you making the time to listen to all of us and hear more about Circle, as well as Manette's personal experience and Gina Marie's experience as a egg donor. And we hope to hear from you soon in the future and have a full consultation.